Acquisition Octopus. 2 and a white for an artifact creature, equipment Octopus. Whenever Acquisition Octopus or equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So this doesn't add any stats if you configure it? That seems sort of garbage. I guess the idea is supposed to be unlimited, like you reconfigure onto a flyer, and that's probably worth your time. I can't see this seeing play in Constructed, unless there's like some sort of way to have the fact that it's an equipment be like somehow cheating it into play or something. And I don't see that anywhere in Historic through Standard. Yeah, if you can equip it to an evasive double striking creature, then maybe you've got a strategy going. Anchor to Reality. 2 and a white for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature, search your library for an equipment or vehicle card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. If it has a mana value less than the sacrifice permanent's mana value, scry 2. Huh. Flavored text, Story Spotlight. The Wanderer sighed in relief as the reality chip tethered her wayward spark to Kamigawa. Huh. Now that's just a fascinating little pile of implication, isn't it? Insane. Parhelion 3 and Historic. Okay, so for 4 mana you get to go get any vehicle, including the dumb 8-drop one. Tutors for Embercleave? It does tutor for Embercleave and puts it into play. You don't even need to care about the attacking creatures nonsense, because it equips on its own ETB even if you put it into play with this. Huh. Oh, and it's not sacrifice an artifact or enchantment, it's sacrifice an artifact or creature. Huh. How much does Parhelion cost to equip? Oh, it's Parhelion 2. Parhelion only costs 4 to crew. Huh. We don't have Cauldron Complete in Historic, do we? Or do we? No. But we do have the Living Weapon 3-drop. I don't think you want to go pay 4 to get that 3-drop Living Weapon in Historic, but what other... Scryfall, Advanced Search. Well, oh no. Oh, drat. Alright. I was wondering why that wasn't the proper size. It's because this is technically Scryfall, and apparently the zoom-in settings save across both windows for Scryfall. Alright, legal in Alchemy, type line, vehicle. So I guess Anchor to Reality can just be a Sika's Chariot. Wow, we don't have a lot of vehicles in Standard. Oh, this is before the new set, though. Right. Okay, so that's something to consider. Still, in the context of Standard, Anchor to Reality into a Sika's Chariot does seem, or at least interesting. Get a lot more copies of a Sika's Chariot. And then what do we have for type equipment? We have No big equipment in Standard. Okay, so no synergies, well, or in Alchemy either. So maybe some interesting things in Historic, and maybe some interesting things with stuff from this set. Simic 8 cat. Or 16 cats, really, huh? The red-black mall we have? I don't think we have the white mall anymore, do we? Mall of the Skyclaves. Wait, no we do, don't we? Okay, yeah, here it is. Yeah, mall's probably the best in Standard that you could grab. Unless you really want to do something dumb with Mask of Gristlebrand or Hand of Vecna. Hand of Vecna doesn't sound very interesting. But I don't think Maul is something you're excited to pay 4 mana and sacrifice an artifact or creature for. That seems a lot worse than just putting 4 Mauls in your deck. Next up, Armguard Familiar, 1 and a blue. For a 2/1 artifact creature, equipment beast, ward 2. Equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has ward 2, reconfigure 4. But despite the art, does not have flying. Seems limited only, but I'm going to try to avoid saying, hey, that actually seems good in limited, because it actually seems good in limited, but not going to try to get distracted. Awakened Awareness, X blue, enchantment aura. Enchant artifact or creature. When enchanted awareness enters the battlefield, put X +1/+1 counters on enchanted permanent. As long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it has base power and toughness 1/1? Wait, what? What is this? You can use it as removal, 2 mana to turn your opponent's stuff into a 1/1. Frogify, that's also a pump, but it's also shrink. It's not animate artifact. It doesn't turn the artifact into a creature, right? You just can put it on a vehicle if you want to shrink the vehicle. It seems so hard for me to imagine this actually being a pump spell. Like, you can spend 6 mana to turn something into a 5/5, right? Puts extra counters on something like Walking Ballista or Mindless Automatron, I guess? It's definitely limited only? I don't even know if it's limited. I really can't figure out what they want you to do with this card. Yeah, the best I can think is that stuff that starts with like XX power, maybe, or that just enters the battlefield with +1/+1 counters, is the idea. But that's so weird. That's such a narrow card. I'm so confused. It's a Frogify, and it turns your 2-drop into a 5/5 for 6 mana. I guess. It does also technically modify stuff. That's true. Maybe there's some limited synergies going on there. Okay, Behold the Unspeakable. 3 blue. Saga. First chapter. Creatures you don't control get -2/-0 until your next turn. Second chapter. If you have 1 or fewer cards in hand, draw 4 cards, otherwise scry 2, then draw 2 cards. Okay. Third, exile this saga, then return to the battlefield transformed. It is a 0/0 flying trample, gets +1/+1 for each card in your hand. That is true that Awakened Awareness, you can bounce the Awakened Awareness and they keep the counters. So if you have some way to like return it to your hand and then play it again and then return it, you can like get an engine going, I guess. Okay, so 5 mana, not quite a board wipe, but like functionally denies a bunch of damage from your opponent next turn. Then you draw cards. Okay, and sagas trigger on your main phase, meaning after you drew, so you had to start the turn empty-handed, or one of the cards you have to be instant speed and you can play it in response to the ability in your draw step, because you actually have to play it before your main phase, or else the ability won't even trigger at all. Is that how that works? And then, yeah, I'm gonna go with limited only. This seems like drawing 4 is good, but paying 5 mana to draw scry 2 then draw 2 delayed is probably way too slow. It does still draw 2, but in order to be paying this for 5 mana, I need this to be drawing 4. Otherwise, I don't think I'm on board. Yeah, the draw is basically just here to make the flip side not bad, but I think the flip side is probably going to be bad outside of limited almost always. So if there's any constructed implication here, it has to be you're drawing a bunch of cards with the second saga, or second chapter, and then you're rebuying it. Like, yeah, nah, I don't, I'm not seeing it, but maybe you get some nonsense with Soul Herder or something, and this is your top end. Maybe. That seems like a problem for somebody else to solve, because I'm not seeing it. Covert Technician, 2 and a blue for a 2/4 artifact creature human ninja. Ninjutsu, 1 and a blue. Whenever Covert Technician deals combat damage to a player, you may put an artifact card with mana value less than or equal to that damage from your hand onto the battlefield. Well. Yeah, 2/4 for 3 is fine and limited, but yeah, that does not seem like it has much in the way of constructed implications. Actually hitting your opponent with a 3-drop that only has 2 power seems challenging. Low-cost ninjutsu abilities can have use if they're bouncing something meaningful. I guess in limited, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to bounce your saga creatures with your ninjutsu ability, and maybe this is something that does that, but like, yeah, like you can Ornithopter and then attack with Covert Technician and spend 2 mana to hit for 2 damage and then put a 2-drop into play, I guess. What 2-drop are you putting into play with Affinity? Like, I don't even know. Can ramp with artifact lands, I guess, in a format where artifact lands are legal? Oh, I guess that there are artifact lands in Standard, they're colorless. Okay, so there is that. Why would you give up damage in Affinity? Well, I don't think you would. I think mostly you're returning like an Ornithopter or something smaller than this, if this is actually playable. Treasure Vault is probably the most interesting card with Covert Technician. You can't build a Covert Technician deck and then just only throw in Treasure Vaults and that's your game plan, but having Treasure Vaults in your deck, I think, goes a long way towards making this card more interesting. Yeah. Rebuying Thought Monitors. A big portion of this card has to be that bouncing stuff with ninjutsu is interesting, and bouncing Thought Monitors is extremely interesting. Yeah. Maybe you got me just on the idea of bouncing Thought Monitors and putting artifact lands into play. That's close to there. That's definitely close to there. Do we want to bounce Smiths? In any world where your Smith wasn't blocked, it's probably big enough you don't want to bounce it. And ironically, anytime where it's small enough that you would want to bounce it, it's probably going to be getting blocked. Imagine beefing it with Metal Sister Shadow Spear. I guess? I mean, you gotta get it up to like 7 power for it to be meaningful, though, right? Can Staff hit Covert Technician? Okay, it's non-token gets turned into a 4/4, not non-creature. That's what I was wondering. Yeah, so if you turn into a 4/4. The trouble is, if you're not ninjutsuing it in, I imagine it's kind of easy to block, but giving it trample with Shadow Spear is kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. I was not super high on Covert Technician on initial reading, but there does seem to be some real potential there, powered by the ninjutsu ability. So mostly, if this is a 2-drop, it seems pretty good. It doesn't seem very good as a 3-drop, which is where my initial reading was most incorrect. Discover the impossible. Tuna blue instant. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, exile one of them face down, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if it's an instant spell with mana value 2 or less. If you don't, put that card into your hand. Oh, what? Oh, what does that do? Hey Chris, how was the Mythic Qualifier? Well, it went good in the sense that I won every match I played and successfully qualified. But I'm not eligible to play in the qualifiers because I'm already qualified for the tournament. If you hit Galvanic with this, what happens? You get to dig again. No, you don't. You just cast a Galvanic for free, and then your next spell you cast gets doubled. But you could, like, cast Galvanic, then cast Discover the Impossible, copy Discover the Impossible, first Discover the Impossible hits Galvanic, and then the next Discover the Impossible hits some other 2-drop, and you cast that 2-drop twice. The whole exiling thing could have just been you may reveal it. The way that it's worded does play around. What's the name of that card? Grafdigger's Cage. If it was just reveal, you couldn't cast spells with this with Grafdigger's Cage in play. But since you exile it first, you can. It's interesting. Discover the Impossible has some interesting implications with any card that cares about Magecraft, that it is 2 Magecraft triggers. Like, you could theoretically end up in an interesting spot where I've played Grixis in Standard with Galvanic Iteration and Sedgemoor Witch because Galvanic Iteration just makes so many triggers with Sedgemoor Witch so quickly. And if you Galvanic Iteration into Discover the Impossible, how many Sedgemoor Witch triggers is that? So 1 off Galvanic, 1 off the copy to Discover the Impossible is 2. 1 off the real Discover the Impossible is 3. And then 2 more for each of the spells Discover the Impossible hits if it hits 2-drops. Yeah, that's a lot of triggers. That's a lot of triggers. Retrieve socks. Did that already go off cooldown already? Alright, be right back. How many 2-drop counterspells exist in the various formats right now? Oh, it doesn't hit sorceries, huh? That's rough. Only negate and test of talents, and now essence capture. And I suppose you could play the unsummon? I guess Discover the Impossible does seem interesting with Leer. We kind of stopped playing Leer decks because no Divide by Zero meant Leer wasn't crazy interesting, but Discover the Impossible does wind up putting 2 cards in the yard that Leer can reuse. Dry Disruption's interesting. That's true. That's true. You can hit Vanishing Verse if you're in a 3-color deck. You could hit Disruption Protocol, but you do still need to pay the extra 1 if you try to cast Disruption Protocol off of Discover the Impossible. So, unlikely you're going to have that extra 1 mana as often as you'd like. Although you could just have random artifacts in play, I suppose. Potentially. Disdainful Stroke does work off Discover the Impossible. Yep. And Disdainful Stroke is already a card that I think you want to play in Standard. Maybe Alchemy, but less so. Although Disdainful Stroke wouldn't be a card I'd be super excited to play in a Leer deck. That might get tricky. Dry Disruption is just as good. Dry Disruption is okay, but I don't know how terribly often you're going to be excited to play Dry Disruption off of Discover the Impossible. But, well, if you're playing a deck with 4 Dry Disruption and 3 Discover the Impossible and playing at instant speed, at least having like 8 threatened copies of Dry Disruption is going to make your opponent think twice a lot about how much mana they spend. Well, with all the talk about Disruption Protocol, let's go ahead and read that. Disruption Protocol. Blue instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, tap an untapped artifact you control or pay 1 mana. 1 generic mana. Counter target spell. So, technically cancel, sort of, but sometimes counter spell. But for the purposes of Discover the Impossible, is technically a 2-drop. But because you still have to pay additional costs, even if you don't pay the mana cost of a spell, you still have to be able to tap the untapped artifact or pay 1 when you attempt to cast it off Discover the Impossible. I don't know. Maybe Disruption Protocol is good. We've played Saw It Coming, and I think Saw It Coming is probably weaker than Disruption Protocol. Probably. Assuming you have, like, any ability to have untapped artifact synergies at all in your deck. Affinity can definitely play this. Maybe. Affinity is not necessarily a deck that wants Counterspell, but it could. Can you give Socks a little kiss on top of their head? I'm going to avoid it, because Socks already ends up giving themselves kisses with my mouth to their tail, and I usually spend the next hour and a half of the stream getting cat hair out of my mouth and eyes. But I can assure you he gets plenty of kisses off stream when I don't have to worry about the hair being in my eyes for the next hour or 2. Or at least when I don't care if that happens. Maybe Blue X Control can too with Spring Leap Drum and another cheap artifact. Yeah, I don't know how easy it is to just jam your deck full of other random artifacts that aren't useless, like Glass Casket or Portable Hole, maybe. But if there's a low opportunity cost of ways to include that, then Disruption Protocol could certainly see play. It doesn't take a lot of upside on your cancel to make cancel worth playing, but you do need some upside, so you can't just play Disruption Protocol with no artifact synergies, I don't think. Alright, next up, Essence Capture. Blue instant, counter target creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on up to one target creature you control. And we've seen this see play in the past. Most decks that want Essence Scatter tend to prefer actual Essence Scatter over Essence Capture, but there have been historically some blue tempo-y aggressive style decks that do wind up valuing the +1/+1 counter from Essence Capture. They tend to be very low to the ground Delver style lists. I mean, I guess we have literal Delver now. Can Delver come back into Standard? Maybe. I tend to not have too much experience building Delver lists. They run a very delicate balance between threats, disruption, and mana efficiency that is not where my experience building decks lies. But yeah, I mean, if my statement is Essence Capture is a card for a Delver style deck, and we have literal Delver, it would make sense that those two fit together. Okay, here's an interaction you may have missed with Capture. You pay for it with Goldspan Treasure, then target your Goldspan with a counter and get the treasure back. Oh yeah, in Standard, where Goldspan Dragon isn't nerfed and targeting Goldspan with a spell gets stuff back. Yeah, that's cute. That's cute. The trouble being, at that point, you're dedicating a spot in your Goldspan Dragon deck to a counterspell that doesn't protect your Goldspan Dragon, and that's kind of a narrow use of that slot. I would say that to me sounds like the kind of thing that would be a sideboard card against like a green deck, maybe? But even then, so many of the threats right now that are actually good against Goldspan Dragon aren't creatures. They're planeswalkers that I still don't know if Essence Capture would be the direction I'd want to go. But that is a good synergy. That is a good synergy. And well, the current metagame that is mostly mid-range planeswalkers is almost certainly not guaranteed, or rather, almost certainly guaranteed to not be where the metagame is at least some point in the next year or so. So, the existence of Essence Capture, while possibly not immediately useful, has much potential in the future, although I suppose Goldspan Dragon will probably rotate before long. But Delver won't, I don't think. I'm not actually sure what the rotation schedule is. And Essence Capture is good with Delver. That will remain true. Next up, Futurist Operative. 3 and a blue for a 3/4 creature human ninja. As long as Futurist Operative is tapped, it's a human citizen with base power and toughness 1/1 and can't be blocked. 2 and a blue, untapped Futurist Operative. Okay, sure, that's kind of cute. I guess. I don't know. Abilities that allow you to untap creatures that don't have restrictions other than mana cost can technically be abused if you give them to other stuff or reduce their cost, but I can't say that I see the immediate use here. For the most part, it's just cute. I like the design of a cheeky way to give something unblockable that's flavorful. Futurist Sentinel, 3 and a blue for a 6/6 artifact vehicle with crew 3. Okay, that seems limited only, but rock on, 6/6. Goshintai of Lost Wisdom, 1 and a blue for an 0/4 legendary enchantment creature shrine. Flying. Okay, your 0/4 flies, sure. At the beginning of your instep, you may pay 1. If you do, target player mills X cards, where X is the number of shrines you control. Because shrines needs more disconnected win cons. Why not? This actually does strike me as like one of the more reasonable shrines, in that it's a 2-drop shrine, which you always could use more of. And an 0/4 flying blocker does actually help shore up your early game against aggro. So why not? Rock on, Shrine. This seems like a card you will be very happy to put one of in your Shrines decks. Now you mill yourself, then use Scuffed Replenish. Yeah, alright. Well, Replenish Shrines. You're not wrong. That's an option. That's totally legal game actions you're allowed to take. Guardians of Oboro, 2 and a blue for a 3/4 creature, Moonfolk Samurai, Defender. Modified creatures you control can attack as though they didn't have Defender. That seems bad. Moving on. Inventive Iteration. No! No! Watsy, no! We didn't need a 3rd card with Iteration in the name. Why? Why? No. I really hope this isn't playable. I need this to not be playable for my sanity. 3 and a blue. Return up to 1 target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. Return an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand if you can't draw a card. Not if you choose not to, if you can't. 3rd, exile this saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. Living Breakthrough, enchantment creature Moonfolked, 3/3. Flying. Whenever you cast a spell, your opponent can't cast spells with the same mana value as that spell until your next turn. What? Oh gosh, I'm supposed to figure out how this card works and then decide if it's good or not? Mana value. Okay, so if you like flashback a 2-drop for 3 mana, it still only counts as a 2-drop. Return up to 1 target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. So for 4 mana, you get a bounce spell. Then you return an artifact, or you draw a card if you just don't have artifacts in your deck. Then you get a 3/3 flyer that, like, sort of restricts your opponent. That's so weird. I don't know. The flip sagas all seem slow. So yeah, compared to sagas that we've had in the past, they are all slow, but I think that's explicitly with acknowledgement of the fact that because they stick around as creatures, they are easier to get long-term value with, and they're easier to reset. And I suspect all of them are balanced around that particular interaction. Yeah, not having haste when they come back is kind of rough, so you're not able to attack with them. You can just block with them that turn. This doesn't seem like it's worth 4 mana to me, but maybe there's some way to make Living Breakthrough really powerful in terms of how it interacts with your opponent's deck and locking them out. But that seems kind of finicky, I guess. I don't know. Is there a way to speed up Saga's Ala proliferation? No playable ones that come to mind, necessarily. At least not in Standard or Alchemy that I can think of. They added some in this set that add lore counters. Okay. Although, I don't think we've seen too many sagas that make me terribly excited to speed them up, if that has any, like, costs to it. Vorinclex does. Yeah, that's true. If you play Vorinclex, all of these sagas enter and you get the first 2 modes on the first turn, and then they transform on the second turn. But even then, that's like a world in which you have a Vorinclex in play, which is already like getting to the win more point. Invoke the Winds is a classic blue. Okay, well, yeah, let's read the next one. Invoke the Winds. 1 and quadruple blue, 5 mana total, sorcery. Gain control of target artifact or creature, untap it. I guess this immediately compares to... what is it? Mind Stealer? What's the 5-drop 3/3 thingy? That's way more castable? Mind Flayer. That's the one. Mind Flayer is a card that's seen play against aggro, because it stole a big thing and put a 3/3 in play. Yeah, and Mind Flayer isn't, like, good, but if your objective is to stop your opponent from attacking you, it's 2 bodies that stop something from attacking you, and it's more playable than this. A lot of removal spells hit Mind Flayer, yes, but the strength of Mind Flayer was that you were boarding it in as a control deck when your opponent was boarding out all their removal spells, because they couldn't afford to keep in removal spells against a control deck. Thinking about Rogues played Lil Mage and it was good versus green? Yeah, but Lil Mage cost 3 mana. That's a pretty big difference between that and 5 mana. I don't see Invoke the Winds being good even out of the board. At least, I certainly can't see it taking Mind Flayer's role in the decks that played Mind Flayer. Maybe Invoke the Winds is like technically something you could play in a deck that doesn't have access to hard removal, that just needs hard removal in a specific matchup. Come to think of it, what's the text on Edgar? Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Okay, so stealing Edgar isn't actually a very big deal, because it still comes back under their control anyway. Yeah, I don't know. If you're boarding into Invoke the Winds, I think it's because there's a very specific thing you're trying to remove in a deck that just doesn't have removal, but it doesn't seem likely. Steal someone's Bolas of Citadel if they manage to not win the game with it. Yeah, if somehow. I feel like blue probably would rather just play a counterspell in that case, though, right? You steal Edgar with Valky, then once you pay 4, it comes back as a Tybalt. Alright, sure. And steals their Edgar again. That's a cute interaction. Valky's still standard playable, huh? That card might actually be respectable again. Maybe I should mess around with that. Stealing Key is a 4-mana swing overall, I guess? And you untap with it? Okay, untapping Key isn't terrible. Trying and failing to steal Hullbreakers in the mono blue mirror. Yeah, no, I don't know that there's many matchups where Hullbreaker Horror is like a particularly valuable card right now, though maybe that changes. One of the popular black-white mid-range variants runs red pathways just to cast Tibble. I respect that. Jin Gataxius Progress Tyrant. 5 blue for a 5/5 legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability triggers only once each turn. Whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, counter that spell. This ability triggers only once each turn. Okay. I mean, that all seems very cute, but that's 7 mana for a not super great body that is counterable. If Jin Gitaxias was uncounterable, I might be interested in it. But, like, because the fact that it's kind of resilient to removal spells is cool. But the fact that they could just counter it, kind of meh. Yeah, it is an interesting reanimation target in that it's hard to remove, but it's also troublesome in that its stats aren't great. So you have to be reviving it basically just solely off the fact that it's really disruptive. Yeah, Kira's the closest card to this I can think of, and 3 mana's quite a bit less than 7. Because, unfortunately, Jin Gitaxias is extraordinarily disdainful strokeable, and I'm very excited to disdainful stroke every deck. Dollhouse Jin? Yeah, maybe. I guess. How many reanimation effects that are playable do we have in Standard? And not counting the 5 mana one that's quadruple white, because I don't think that's getting there. I guess we have Dollhouse, might be the closest, but even that's still 6 mana. Not hitting walkers or enchantments is kind of not great either. Yeah, I guess. But we don't have any walkers that can remove Jin right now, right? I guess there's the Wanderer if you attack with Jin. I guess it's amusing that if you're playing Dollhouse Jin, then if you cast a Dollhouse after Jin, you get 2 Dollhouses. That's a lot of Dollhouses. Don't think Dollhouse of Horrors is too playable while a Braid is a thing. But a Braid isn't a thing in Standard, is it? I mean, I guess maybe it is because it hits the backside of Edgar, but I haven't seen decks playing a Braid. Is Dollhouse legendary? I don't think it is. Yeah, alright. Maybe there's something to reanimating Jin. I suspect that's still probably not great, but Jin is the first monocolored card we've seen that doesn't have the, well, it just dies to Vanishing Verse problem. Braid will be playable with the artifact set coming? Yeah, that might be the case. So far I haven't seen many artifacts that make me, like, concerned about playing a Braid. I wonder if... We looked at Restoration of Aganjo previously. Maybe that's like a theoretical discard outlet for Jin Gitaxias? Although, again, as we mentioned earlier, part of the problem with that card is you kind of want to discard the thing you're about to reanimate for 2 mana with it. Otherwise, you just might not have targets to get back. Oh, look at you sleeping on the floor right next to me, kitty. You're so cute. Oh, look at that tummy. They can't see, but I can. Oh, you're cute. Dies to Rite of Oblivion, though? It dies to 2 Rite of Oblivions, I guess? If they want to cast a Rite of Oblivion from hand and 6 mana and sacrifice 2 permanents to kill the Jin Gitaxias, maybe that's good for you? I will say there's also... Okay, hold on. You can just Unexpected Windfall and cast Jin Gitaxias. And also Unexpected Windfall is a discard outlet for your Dollhouse game plan, and Jin Gitaxias copies Unexpected Windfall. I mean, like, I don't actually think that's good, but it it is the start of a shell that kind of makes sense. And I do love copying instants and sorceries. It's a bummer that Jin-Gitaxias is still, like, completely counterable, though. That bit's a bummer. Oh, yeah, and you can't play Jin and Leer in the same deck because if you have a Leer in play, your Jin-Gitaxias ability doesn't protect anything. Bleh. Alright. Well, maybe. Maybe there's something there somewhere. We'll see eventually. Alright, Kairi, the Swirling Sky, 4 blue, for a 6/6 legendary creature Dragon Spirit, Flying Ward 3. When Kairi, the Swirling Sky, dies, choose 1. Return any number of target non-land permanents with total mana value 6 or less to their owner's hand. Okay. Mill 6 cards, then return up to 2 instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. Okay. Huh. Well, once again, kind of suffers from so much of the removal being exile-based. We've already been playing the 5-mana dragon with Ward, but that dragon just kind of is... There's not a huge difference right now in Standard between the stat lines of a 5/5 and a 6/6 in terms of what they're capable of blocking. And this costing 1 more mana probably just makes it not particularly viable. The only reason it's been the... What's the name of that 5-drop that I'm talking about? The Adventures in the Forgotten Realm dragon. But the only reason that's really even playable is because it's a good blocker against aggro, so the lower mana cost is a huge portion of what makes it decent. Not necessarily aggro, but like mid-rangey decks. It's a good blocker against that's hard for them to remove. Imrith, that's the one. I don't think this can do Imrith's job. And I don't think... Yeah, I don't know. 6 mana seems like too much for this. Because of the Dollhouse Reanimator plan? Well... I don't know about that, although the mill 6 cards bit is, I guess, kind of cool. If we end up with like some kind of sacrifice outlet, most of these dragons don't seem super playable without a sacrifice outlet though. And I don't know that there's reliable sacrifice outlets that let you control when you're getting these triggers in response to your opponent's exile-based removal. I don't think I see a home here. I don't think I see a home. Alright, another one of these March cards. March of Swirling Mist, blue X, instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may exile any number of blue cards from your hand. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. Up to X target creatures phase out. Huh. Okay. That's interesting. This is such a simple card that I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen more of this before. This is pretty flexible. It fills a lot of roles all at once. You can remove your opponent's creatures after they attack if you need to just prevent damage. And then you could also remove their blockers at the same time. So like if they attack with 3 creatures and have 2 blockers, you can remove the 2 attackers you can't deal with, block the one that you can deal with, and then also remove their 2 blockers for 5 mana. You can also remove your creatures in response to removal spells. This feels like the kind of card that I would play in every single deck I have access to in Limited. I don't know about Constructed, but the flexibility makes it interesting as a main deckable card because it's got use against basically everything. It's close to 2 mana counter target removal spell, although you lose out on the opportunity to actually attack with the creature that they're removing on that turn. March of Swirling Mist seems totally unplayable in Limited? No. You're going to play March of Swirling Mist 100% of the time in Limited, and it's going to be a very good card. I suspect you will be very surprised by how good this card is. There's a breed of card in Limited that are like 4 mana, your opponent can't block this turn, that are hard to rank because they win the game 100% of the time where you cast them, and then you just never cast them if they don't win the game. And those are usually not great, but this is essentially 5 mana, your opponent can't block this turn, also mess with combat math, also protect your creatures. It's a lot of effect for a deceptively low amount of mana. Hibernation isn't necessarily a good card, but this is a lot more modal than the simple lines of text which lead you to believe. Yeah, it's difficult to rate versatility, and this is a very small number of words that actually play out as a huge amount of versatility. Yeah, I'm still not actually sure if this is good enough in Constructed, but Mono White has been sideboarding into the 3-drop 3/2 that gives creatures phasing for a while. And playing that against board wipes, but that's been kind of exclusively a sideboard card. Swirling Mist in the right situation could be a main deckable card that does that. I could see March of Swirling Mist seeing play, but I don't think I expect to. But I wouldn't be surprised if an opponent jams it against me at some point in Constructed. In Constructed, I don't see this being better than a counterspell. I could see it being better than a counterspell main deck. I don't see it being better than a counterspell sideboard. I think Swirling Mist is one of those cards that gets its power from its versatility, and that's usually the recipe for a good mainboard card and not a good sideboard card. If blue tempo isn't a deck and limited and this card is nothing? No. I think March Swirling Mist you played in literally every limited deck that ever has access to blue 100% of the time you're given the ability to draft it. Like, maybe not over, like, a high-value synergy pick, but, like, if March of Swirling Mist ends the draft in your color pool and you're in blue, you're going to play March of Swirling Mist in 100% of decks. You will never not play it. I'm completely confident of that. It's very difficult to build a limited deck that doesn't care about creature combat math, and that's what this card is excellent against. What else did I miss? What do we think is good so far? What did I think was good so far? Disruption Protocol, Discover the Impossible, and Covert Technician seemed like they had interesting implications. Anchored Reality seemed like it might be interesting. Wandering Emperor was less good than I actually expected it to be when I first read it. Spirited Companion seemed like it would see play in some decks, but wouldn't be, like, excellent, would just be fine. Restoration of Iganjo is probably the card I'm most interested in brewing around in terms of, like, seems neat. And I want it to be good because the play pattern seemed fun, but I don't know that it seemed explicitly good. Lion Sash was probably the most just like, yeah, this is a good card so far. Light Paws seemed interesting, and like some decks would want it, but not like inherently powerful. Invoke Justice seemed better than I was expecting, but probably still not good. Farewell seems like it could actually be interesting and cool and good in the sideboards of some decks. Hotshot Mechanics seemed like it would probably see play, but not really be the power up to any specific archetype, just be like totally acceptable filler that makes an archetype function. Born to Drive seemed interesting if there was a vehicle deck, because it could actually crew Plow and curves into Plow nicely, or off of Plow nicely. And then there was one other card that actually struck me as interesting. Where was that? Sunblade Samurai seemed like it could potentially be interesting in Historic if the mana-based constraints to play enough planes are doable, just because discarding and putting enchantment and creature in the graveyard goes such a long way towards turning on Delirium without actually being card disadvantage. It has me kind of interested. Ooh. Alright, next up, Mindlink Mech. 2 and a blue for a 4/3 artifact vehicle, flying. Whenever Mindlink Mech becomes crewed for the first time each turn, until end of turn, Mindlink Mech becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature that crewed it this turn, except it's 4/3. Except it's 4/3? What does that line of text mean? Have we ever seen something like that before to refer to stats? That it doesn't say its power and toughness is a 4/3? What? Huh. It's an artifact. It's a vehicle artifact in addition to its other types, and it has flying. Probably just short form so they can fit it on the card. I agree that's what it is. I just don't know if we've ever seen that before. It's interesting. So if a creature crews it will become a copy of that creature, but it will be a 4/3 and have flying and be a vehicle. Yeah. I mean, I agree that it's, like, very understandable what it means. I just don't... I'm surprised I don't think we've ever seen that wording before. Crew 1 on a 4/3 flyer seems nutty. Yeah. For a 3-drop? That strikes me as probably good. This seems like a good card, but I don't know what immediately synergizes with it. Still, this seems very similar to Heart of Kirin or Smuggler's Copter, but 3-drop instead of 2-drop is a very different spot on the curve. Dreadhorde Arcanist. Ooh, that's interesting, isn't it? You can get back 3 or 4 drops, except how easily are you getting spells in your graveyard to flash back on curve? I guess power level doesn't have to be on curve, but most of when you build decks, you're concerned with how a card functions on curve. Chariot. Wait, okay, so Mindlink Mech. No, wait, Chariot's legendary. You can't crew Mindlink Mech with Chariot, unfortunately. No, you can't. Well, you can crew Mindlink Mech with Chariot, but the ability specifically says non-legendary, so you can't turn it into a copy of Chariot. Vehicles can't crew other vehicles anymore? Oh, wait, I thought the rules change was that vehicles couldn't crew themselves. Can they not crew any vehicles? The rules changed something about vehicles I've heard, but I haven't seen what the actual text update is myself. If they released the comprehensive rules update already, I need to go find that and read that at some point. Only themselves is the restriction they changed. Okay, I believe chat. So we could still crew Mindlink Mech with Isika's Chariot, except that the non-legendary clause makes that not super useful. It's okay, we can still have boats drive bigger boats, or even better, have boats drive smaller boats, because that makes much more sense. We can still have console flagship crewing Smuggler's Copter. Copy Sprite Dragon and then get free counters? Yeah, I suppose, if you want to crew this and then start casting spells. It's actually a somewhat moderate nerf to my Depala Commander deck. It's a sad nerf to Magda, Asika's Chariot. What's the artifact that makes all creature types? Because having your Asika's Chariot crew and then tap itself to make a treasure crew with the tokens to make 2 treasures and then crew itself to make a 3rd treasure was an important part of that deck. Maskwood Nexus, that's the one. That's the one. Crew it with a haster to give it haste on turn 3. Oh, alright, yeah, that's true. So on turn 2, you attack with your whatever that red multi-kicker vampire is. Just play it as a 2/2 with haste on turn 2 and swing. And then on turn 3, play Mindlink Mech, crew, swing for 4 in the air. That actually seems pretty decent. I don't hate that. Oh, we can't crew Mindlink Mech with Magda, though? I mean, we can, but it doesn't become another Magda and make 2 treasures? Or 3 treasures? Oh, can you imagine if it became a non-legendary copy of Magda? Crew with Magda on turn 3, make a treasure, swing, make 2 more treasures. Oh, that would have been so good! Watsy, why can't we have fun things? No. Oh. Too bad. Too bad. Dreadhorde Arcanist does seem interesting, but as far as on curve goes, unless you're starting off with a turn 1 Faithless Looting, I don't know how you have cards in your graveyard for Mindlink Mech to copy. But I guess that could be some kind of late game thing. This is still silly with most ninjutsu creatures. I guess in terms of like on hit effects, but how many of the ninjutsu creatures are super playable? I mean, I guess we can put really big artifact vehicles into play with Covert Technician, technically. Have we talked about Mnemonic Sphere yet? No. We are proceeding in color and then alphabetical order. So Mnemonic Sphere is over here. Mindlink Mech seems like a really interesting card. It's got pretty close to just good enough stats on its own to be playable in a deck that mostly wants to be aggressive, I figure. And seems like it has a lot of synergies that might show up later. You can put Key into play if you crew Mech with Technician. Yeah, that's interesting. Although I don't know if I want to play Key in a deck with vehicles. But if you play Dreadhorde Arcanist, Mindlink Mech, and Key, then Key is your discard outlet to get spells into the graveyard to flashback with your Mindlink Mech Arcanist. Alright, yeah. This seems like a fun card. I'll be excited to brew around it and then see it in play a billion times. Mirror Shell Crab. 5 blue, artifact creature crab, 5/7. Has ward 3, channel, 2 and a blue, discard Mirror Shell Crab, counter target spell or ability unless its controller pays 3. That seems limited only as much as I would like to be able to play Mana Leak that's uncounterable. Yeah. Right. Mnemonic Sphere. 1 and a blue artifact. Pay 1 and a blue, sacrifice Mnemonic Sphere, draw 2 cards. 4 mana, draw 2. That's okay. Channel, pay 1 and discard Mnemonic Sphere, draw a card. Alright, fill me in. Why are we excited for this? I guess it's an artifact you can put in the graveyard for Delirium? Reminds me of the Kaladesh 4-mana draw 2 that cycles for 1 blue. Not Kaladesh, that was, Almaket? Yeah, that did see play. Although mostly that saw play because of Search for Iskanta, but Mnemonic Sphere would fill that same role. In terms of just powering your graveyard kind of fast. Why make up a new word for cycling? Because there's a lot of channel abilities that do things that aren't just drawing cards. And so channel... Actually, channel isn't even a new word, right? Channel is actually a card that's existed before? Or a term that's existed before in previous Kamigawa sets, I think? If I'm not mistaken. Yes, channel is actually a returning word that existed like 17 years ago. But why not just put cycling on this card because we have more cycling options? Well, I assume the rest of it was to pull flavor from the old Kamigawa set, and then the fact that this one is technically just cycling is kind of just... Well, Mnemonic Sphere strikes me as something that I guess is kind of interesting, but unless you're really getting advantage out of putting an artifact in the graveyard, I don't know that I'm super excited. The most interesting part of this, I guess, is the idea that it isn't the channel to me. The most interesting part is the idea that it's a hieroglyphic illumination that you can split over 2 payments. So it's not as good as Behold the Multiverse, but it does leave an artifact in play until you decide to crack it, which I guess could be good with, like, Disruption Protocol. Maybe that's something? Yeah, you can improvise with it and then draw later. I don't know that any format that has improvise is excited to play in Mnemonic Sphere, just because 2 mana in the context of Historic is a lot to play while not actually doing anything terribly meaningful to the board state. Yeah. Search for Iskanta or effects like it, I think, would be what breaks me on the difference between Mnemonic Sphere being good or not, or whether there's enough synergies with Mnemonic Sphere being in play. But the base case of Hieroglyphic Illumination, like, this is better than Hieroglyphic Illumination, I think. And Hieroglyphic Illumination was a playable card. So that makes Mnemonic Sphere very close to a playable card. The question is just, is there enough artifact synergy to make, or enough synergies with discard it to draw a card in order to make this better than Behold the Multiverse? Because Behold the Multiverse is much better than Hieroglyphic Illumination, and we already have that. And we also have Memory Deluge. So there's a lot of competition for this sort of card draw slot that kind of outclasses comparable cards to it. So there needs to be some sort of synergy to make this actually playable that I don't specifically see. Next up, Grixis, Lurrus, Kroxa, discard and historic. Yeah, Lurrus is a reason that it might be interesting. That's true. That's true. Mobilizer Mech, 1 blue, 3/4 artifact vehicle. Flying. Whenever Mobilizer Mech becomes crewed, up to 1 other target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Crew 3. Huh. Oh, that's... That's interesting. So if you have 4 Mobilizer Mechs in play, You crew one of them, and all three of them are attacking for 12 power in the air? Yeah, yet another card that crews with plows. They don't chain? Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, because it doesn't crew another artifact vehicle. It only animates it. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. But plow is interesting. Plow is very interesting. So if you're one drop, so turn 2 you play plow, turn 3 you play Mobilizer Mech and Hotshot Mechanic. Hotshot Mechanic crews Mobilizer Mech, and then Mobilizer Mech crews plow, and you're swinging with plow on turn 3 and getting all 3 of your mana back? That's actually, like, kind of interesting, right? What do I think of the art style in this set? I admit that it's kind of sporadic. Like, it's difficult for me to get a true picture of like what the aesthetic of a city would be. It seems kind of disjointed to have like cyberpunk aesthetic right next to spirit aesthetic right next to giant mecha aesthetic. And I think that so far the giant mecha aesthetic is the one that seems most incongruous with the other stuff, but I've liked all the art. I just have not yet really had a super easy time seeing how the very different parts fit together into a world. But in their defense, that disconnect is literally the theme of the story, so even though that's kind of weird and discordant, it's not discordant with the ideas of the setting, or the ideas of the story of the setting, I suppose. Does Mobilizer Mech crew Mindlink Mech for double triggers? I'm not sure what idea of double triggers you're looking for from that. You can crew Mindlink Mech with Mobilizer Mech, but that would not trigger a Mobilizer Mech trigger off of Mindlink Mech, because your crewing before Mindlink Mech actually becomes a copy of the thing that crewed it. Like, you crew and then a trigger goes on the stack to turn Mindlink Mech into a copy of Mobilizer Mech, and you then resolve the trigger way after the timing where Mindlink Mech actually got crewed. Yes, and this ability that turns something into a creature did not actually crew that thing. Counting how many times you say mech. It's definitely beginning to trip me up, especially with the fact that both of these cards we're talking about start with a different M word. You could crew Mindlink Mech mid-combat if you were feeling silly. Yeah, that's true. If you have something, like if you want to give Mindlink Mech first strike after attacks and after blocks, you could. Wait until they print Iteration Mech. No, we don't need more iterations. 3 is enough. Mindlink Mech is the first crew. Oh, okay. Well, you could technically animate Mindlink Mech with Mobilizer Mech and then crew it mid-combat. I guess. You could cheese it that way. We're going to have to build white-blue plow, aren't we? That's going to be weird. Alright, the Modern Age. 1 in a blue. Saga. Draw a card, then discard a card. Same for the second chapter, and then returns as a 2/3 with flying vector glider. Huh. Cyber spirits is an interesting conceptual idea. Come to think of it, they've been releasing D&D companion pieces to like every single one of the Magic the Gathering settings lately. We got companion guides to Ravnica. We got, I guess we didn't technically get a companion guide to AFR. We got Strixhaven. Was it only those two, or did we have a third one, I thought? But anyway, something about this spirit in particular really makes me go, oh, we're definitely going to get a, quote, not cyberpunk, trust us, totally not cyberpunk, companion to D&D in Kamigawa, huh? I do think we got Innistrad. I don't think we got Kaldheim. This seems limited only. I don't think 2 mana draw a card, then discard a card gets there. Don't know anything about D&D. What is a companion in D&D? Oh, I don't even know if I'm technically using the right words. Basically, we got books that were, hey, do you want to play D&D in this setting? Here is a book for your dungeon master that includes all of the information they need about this setting and the stat lines of characters and creatures and classes that are unique to this setting. But yeah, campaign settings. Confused when you say the word companion because isn't that only Ikoria? Yeah, I don't think it's companion. What are those actually? Dungeons and Dragons Guildmaster. It was called the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. D&D/Magic the Gathering adventure book and campaign settings. I don't know why I had the word companion in my head. I think they might have called something else like a DM's companion book. Or maybe I'm thinking of like the word compendium. Maybe that's what I'm thinking. Is there a big market for that? I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is a pretty big property, and pretty much, it's not necessarily like that's a Magic the Gathering product, so much as it is Dungeons and Dragons is a big market, and Magic settings are more stuff they can release for Dungeons and Dragons. It is a crossover that is more about Dungeons and Dragons profiting than it is about Magic profiting. We're coming up to the best card in the set according to Gertler. Okay. Moon Circuit Hacker. 1 and a blue for a 2/1 enchantment creature human ninja with ninjutsu blue. When Moon Circuit Hacker deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card unless Moon Circuit Hacker entered the battlefield this turn. Huh. Ninjutsu 1 is actually really interesting in terms of getting to recycle ETBs for very low amounts of mana. They get to reuse the art and lore they've already paid for. Yeah, I do think that's actually a pretty big part of it. I feel like this goes over the head of a lot of Magic the Gathering players, especially those of us who are more into the competitive side of the actual game physically. But Magic the Gathering as a property is, by a pretty wide margin, the fantasy setting that spends the most money on world building by like a lot. The amount of art and setting building that is commissioned for Magic the Gathering is huge. Like, when you think about it, super huge. a bunch of other trading card games that have a lot less history and put out a lot less cards and a lot fewer sets than Magic tend to reuse a lot of existing art. So the idea that using Magic the Gathering settings for D&D materials is reasonable is kind of super sensible when you think about it in that sense that, yeah, Magic the Gathering is already the property in the world that spends the most money developing a setting. Why would they not reuse that? Your cat wants out. I'm looking forward to when I start editing this all down for YouTube, and I have to try to decide whether to keep in tangents about Dungeons and Dragons in or not. Still Magic lore sucks, unfortunately? Wow, no, I super huge disagree with that. I love Magic the Gathering lore. I don't tend to talk about it on stream as often because it's not super relevant to the topics at hand most of the time, but Magic lore is rad. Admittedly, a very significant portion of the lore for Magic the Gathering is actually in the form of world building and not in the form of exposition per se, which makes it kind of weird. I guess, is it weird to say that maybe Magic is the Dark Souls of trading card games? But a lot of the storytelling is essentially environmental storytelling rather than expositive storytelling. So we do get some stuff that's novels, that has world building that way, and is more traditional storytelling. And then we get short stories like the Get Rog Monster short story that still tugs my heartstrings every single time I go back and reread it. Which, by the way, if you haven't read that, if I'm going to be on a tangent, I might as well be on a meaningful tangent. What's this? MTG Sacrifice short story? Yeah, alright. Don't stop watching me or anything, but here's the link to that short story. Go read that at some point when you have free time, because that short story is still so freaking good. So extremely good. And then there's everything Alison Luhr ever wrote. It was great. Ah, so good. Still great. Did you read the Innistrad novel with Davriel? I need to get around to that. That one was written by Brandon Sanderson, who is, kind of a good writer. The Get Rog Monster story is somehow exceptional. Yeah, I like most Magic stories, but that Get Rog Monster story in particular is just, actually exceptional. So good. Truth of Names is what first got me interested in the game. That's the one with Alesha, right? That one's also super, super good. A lot of the early Magic novels are not, technically great, but they are fun in kind of a cheesy way. Kind of in the sense that, wrestling and anime are not, always good, but even when they're not good, it's stupid, but the phrase, "that's so stupid, I love it," is a very, very powerful phrase. When did I get into Magic the Gathering? That was Khans of Tarkir a couple of months after it came out, shortly before Fate Reforged came out. You reminded me that I need to read the second Mistborn series still. Read the first last year and it was so good. Yeah, Mistborn's good. I went and read a lot of Sanderson's other stuff first and then went back to Mistborn and was kind of disappointed, which is unfair, but Sanderson's been improving a lot as a writer and was already a stellar writer. And the first Mistborn series, if you enjoyed it, good news. Everything else that comes after that gets even better. How did I discover magic? I was... So, like most people, as a kid, I had encountered magic occasionally and, like, went to summer camps or something where some people played it. But following that, I got into some drafts with friends over the internet that were kind of just informal. But I really got into magic after I graduated college and was spending a year looking for work and getting very depressed because finding a job is kind of tough. And I got an interview at Wizards of the Coast for a customer service role. And part of that interview that I got was questions about how well you knew the rules of Magic the Gathering. And so, after doing the interview and before I got a call back about the next step, I decided I was going to read the comprehensive rules of Magic the Gathering. So I did that, which was about 200 or 300 pages. And then, like a week after that, I got a call back saying they were going to go with somebody else, which was sad. But at that point, I'd already started playing Magic Online to try to actually understand the rules I had just read better, and they had me trapped. It was all a gimmick. Why should you never have your password be beef stew? It's not stroganoff. That's delightful. What about Scarlet? That was some of that drafting online with friends stuff I talked about that didn't really get me into the game so much as just made me aware it existed. That's how they get you. Yeah, they give you job interviews and then don't actually give you the job. But I guess they did eventually give me a job eventually. I got that paycheck one way or the other. It just took 6 or 7 years. Tangent should probably be done less if you want to get to bed sometime reasonable. Maybe. I think I might just have given up on getting this done in under 12 hours, to be honest. I might need more energy drinks, though, which is probably not going to be great for my sugar intake. Okay, so Moon Circuit Hacker. Low-cost ninjutsu is interesting. Effect not super stellar. Kind of a combo card. Moonfolk Puzzle Maker. 2 and a blue for a 1/4 artifact creature Moonfolk Wizard. Flying. Limited only. Not going to read the rest of it. What did you play in the qualifier, Jeskai? Since I'm a member of the MPL, I'm already qualified for the upcoming tournaments, so I'm not eligible to play in them. Which is to say, I won every match I played and successfully qualified. This is the Gertler card? Yeah. I saw him talking about it on stream last night. Moon Snare Prototype. Single blue artifact. Tap it and tap an untapped artifact or creature you control. Add 1. Channel. 4 and a blue. Discard Moon Snare Prototype. And the owner of target non-land permanent puts it on the top or bottom of their library. So we have a mana accelerant that contributes very quickly to affinity, and also in the late game is a 5 mana Aether Gust that hits any kind of permanent, although it has, well, any color of permanent, but not lands, but can't hit stuff on the stack. But this is flexible. It's acceleration, it's affinity, and it's removal in the late game when you no longer want acceleration. It's not the style of deck that I am accustomed to building, but there are a lot of cards like Disruption Protocol that play well with it, even if you're not necessarily immediately turning on the mana ramp aspect of it. But like, even just Moonsnare Prototype into Mnemonic Sphere into turn 3 having 4 mana up is kind of interesting. Yeah, I would say this is a powerful card that could definitely have a lot of homes in a type of super synergistic deck I don't have experience enough with to immediately say, yes, this will clearly do this thing in this deck and be good. But it will probably do something in some deck and be good. Moonsnare Specialist. 3 and a blue for a 2/2 creature human ninja. Ninjutsu, 2 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand. Mana cost that's probably mostly beneficial for limited, but seems like it would be cool in limited. Top tier analysis. Yeah, I mean, like, I can only be so... I gotta be honest about when I don't have the insight into analyzing a card correctly. And I think this is one of those times where I don't have the insight to analyze a card terribly correctly. Might do something in some deck somewhere. No. I'm convinced it will do something in some deck somewhere. I'm just not sure what that deck looks like or what role with what synergies it will be playing with, but it'll be good somewhere. My analysis is technically slightly better than it might do something, because I am confident it will do something. Every color combination will be better, just not necessarily relative to all the others. Yeah, that's true. Every color combination only gets stronger. The question is relativity. Whether Simic gets anything in particular, I don't know. That might be down to multicolored cards. And I haven't seen any of those yet. Maybe we'll get Growth Spiral reprinted. I can dream, right? Nobody tell me whether Growth Spiral did or didn't get reprinted. I want to be able to believe that for a little while longer. Every single set that comes out, I have a little bit of hope. Next up, Network Disruptor. Single blue 1/1 artifact creature Moonfolk Rogue. Flying. When it enters the battlefield, tap target permanent. That seems like nothing. Moonsnare's a good ninjutsu tempo card that can be pretty annoying. I'm willing to believe that Moonsnare probably is very good in limited. I don't know that I could see it being playable and constructed at those costs. Maybe if you knocked one off both costs, it would be constructed considerable. Okay, next. Planar Incision. 1 and a blue instant. Exile target artifact or creature, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, that generally is usually a limited only costing for that effect. Flavor text scary. Jin Gataxius had long coveted the secrets of planeswalking, spirits that could pass between worlds made for perfect test subjects. Spirits that could pass between worlds? Wait, have we ever... What's that? What spirits that could pass between worlds? Oh, Haunted of Night's Reach? Haunted of Night's Reach is the only one we've ever seen that had the ability to, like, pseudo-planeswalk stuff, right? What was the name of Haunted of Night's Reach? Lore? Oh, it wasn't the Haunted of Night's Reach, it was the Myosian of Night's Reach? Yain Myosian. Okay. Anyway, that's the spirit that sent Tetsuo Umezawa to Dominaria. So I suppose that's supposed to be what the implication is about spirits that can pass between worlds? So yeah, the spirit realm and the mortal realm are different, but there's a lot of planes that have multiple realms that you can travel between without having a spark. Like, Theros has the underworld and the mortal world. Kaldheim has like 9 different realms, and realm traveling is a different thing from planeswalking. It was the Myosian of Night's Reach that sent Umezawa over to Dominaria, but that was pre-mending. I suppose, right, travel between planes worked differently pre-mending. What about Eldraine? I don't know of any different realms within Eldraine, necessarily. This plane has the two worlds and the technology available to experiment on it, and while it isn't planeswalking, it's close enough to try and experiment with. So we also know about the portal on why am I struggling to remember names of settings? The other K planet. Kaladesh, yes. So there was a portal on Kaladesh that got stolen by Tesoret and used in War of the Spark to bring in an army of Eternals from Amonkhet. That was the most recent tech we've seen that involved travel through planes without a Planeswalker Spark. I still don't understand the spirits that could pass between worlds made for perfect test subjects implication, but I suppose the actual story will probably elaborate on that. The experiments were specifically about completing stuff without destroying their immaterial soul/spirit stuff. Okay. So part of the problem could be that it's difficult to complete something without removing the Planeswalker Spark, because if it gets completed, it no longer has a soul. And it led to Tamiyo being completed without losing their Spark. Okay, well, there we go. There we go. All right. Interesting. So the Phyrexians now have a potentially loyal servant who actually can planeswalk. Although, that seems kind of like putting the horse way after the cart, because in order to get to Kamigawa in the first place, Jin Gitaxias had to planeswalk. So how did they successfully get all these Praetors to different planes, but they're still like, we need to figure out how to do the thing we already did? Tesoret works with Phyrexians now? That's believable. Planar Bridge. Oh, yeah, I get, yeah, okay, right. That makes for a simple enough explanation of, it's Tesoret with the Planar Bridge. Oh, do we have actual confirmation instead of just implication that it's Tesoret with the Planar Bridge? I mean, putting the pieces together, that makes the most sense, A to B. That's the only explanation that we could have, but do we have actual confirmation? I believe it. It was mentioned in the MTG story. Okay. We had Tesoret show up on Kamigawa in one of the stories that I had already not read, but I guess got a summary of. But as far as I know, that was in a flashback that Tesoret kidnapped the Emperor and then presumably had something to do with the Emperor's Spark going haywire and forcing them to planeswalk without their own control, which seems to be what the story of Anchor to Reality is implying finally got fixed with the reality chip jellyfish synergy thing. Tesoret also killed the Rat Orphan's parents in the story where Johnny was visiting Tamiyo way back. Really? I forgot about that, but now that you mention it, I do think I recall that. Vorinclex went to Kaldheim, but its flesh got ripped apart while going to Kaldheim. Oh. Huh. So it was the flesh that didn't travel well, but the machine inanimate bits did? Interesting, interesting, interesting. Anyway, Planar Incision. Card sucks. Limited only. Moving on. Prosperous Thief. 2 and a blue for a 3/2 creature human ninja with ninjutsu 1 and a blue. Whenever one or more ninja or rogue creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So because it says 1 or more, it's only 1 treasure token, no matter how many ninjas or rogues deals damage. It's difficult for me to feel like getting a treasure token is powerful enough here for the costs of this card. without, like, some very powerful bounce synergies. Maybe technically, but this does not strike my fancy as being likely to be the way that I want to be doing that. If one of those rogues or ninja has first strike and can trigger twice, that's true. That's true. But, like, it's a lot of investment to get only one treasure token worth of payoff on a card that stats are not terribly good for the cost at a constructed level. If this also bounced a creature, it would be insane. Yeah, if it made a treasure and returned one of their creatures, that would definitely be playable, although it would probably have to cost more than 2 mana. But what if you discard the bounced creature to windfall, then it's 3 treasures? I guess. But you're not casting any free spells, so you still gotta pay for windfall. Are we copying that with the 4/3 flyer ever? Are we copying Prosperous Thief? It's not a very good curve, is it? Then you're playing like Prosperous Thief as your 4-drop? I don't know. I guess then you get 2 treasures because there's Prosperous Thief and the copy of Prosperous Thief. But ninjas in Historic. Yeah, maybe ninjas in Historic since you have flying ninjas. This card does get a lot better with flying ninjas. You turn 2, play the 2-drop flying ninja. Turn 3, swing with it. Ninjutsu Prosperous Thief in. Have 2 mana up. Replay the flying ninja. The trouble is that ninjas implicitly wants to be interactive, and that might not be terribly efficient uses of your mana in terms of being reactive. But, like, maybe? I guess? I don't know. I don't know. It still doesn't strike me as what the ninjas deck wants to be doing. But, yeah, it's close to tempting. If it had flash, maybe. I'd love if Prosperous Thief had flash. I'd love that. Alright, the reality chip. 1 in a blue for a 0/4 legendary artifact, creature, equipment, jellyfish. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. Huh, that's weird that doesn't say you may look at the top card of your library at any time. I wonder if that's intentional or if the line break made them just not realize that the word at was missing. Yeah, rogues was what I was thinking of in Historic. That is kind of interesting, but I think it's still a little too expensive for Prosperous Thief. Okay, as long as the reality chip is attached to a creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, reconfigure for 2 in a blue. So, for 2 mana, you get a blocker for a couple of turns. Eventually, if you have a creature, you get to equip it to something to get some card advantage in the late game. The trouble is that, like, until turn 5 or 6, it's difficult to imagine spending this much mana to reconfigure it onto something. So how interested are you in spending 3 or 4 turns having an 0/4 blocker? I don't think you're very interested in that. That could be card for Affinity. Yeah, maybe, but like, one of Affinity's existing strengths is that it already has a ton of card draw. I don't think what it needs is more card draw, especially not card draw this expensive. I don't think. You could play it as a one-of, I guess, and then see if it turns out to be interesting, but it feels like it's a card that already does what the deck is good at, less good than the existing cards. Reminds me of a Cosimo-like card where everyone thinks it's broken, but in practice it never works out. Yeah, I spent a long time trying to convince people that Cosimo wasn't good when it came out, and it took a long time to have any success with that. Card selection would be one of those missing key. Yeah. But Reality Chip isn't necessarily even selection. And speaking of cards that do something Affinity's already good at, but potentially worse than the cards that are already in Affinity, we have the next card, Reality Heist. 5 blue for an instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 artifact cards from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So the fact that it has affinity for artifacts immediately makes it seem like a card that goes in affinity, but this is what I'm going to try over Reverse Engineer. This doesn't seem better than Reverse Engineer to me is the problem. Potentially you get to a point where it costs less to cast, but realistically, Reverse Engineer basically costs 2 mana and affinity pretty quickly. And Reverse Engineer actually hits your non-artifact spells, like your counter spells. And how many cards does Affinity play that aren't artifacts but are very important? Like, it plays the Mana Leak right now that costs 1 mana, and it has the option to play the new counter spell that probably only costs 2 mana, and neither of those Reality Heist hits. Yes, it is not Dig Through Time. It only hits artifacts. That's a pretty big part of it. If Chip is reconfigured on a creature and it dies, does it die too or go back to being a creature? It goes back to being a creature. It does not get destroyed while it's equipped to something. Or rather, while it's attached to something, I suppose is the more technical terms. Wonder if an artifact deck will exist in Standard / Alchemy. Possibly. Definitely possibly. We're pretty close to having enough tools to make stuff cost less. The trouble is, a pretty significant portion of the artifact payoffs, like Reality Heist, require you to have a lot of meaningful artifacts in your deck. And, like, I don't know if I want Reality Heist in a vehicle deck. I might want something like Moonsnare Prototype, or Disruption Protocol, maybe? But, like, I don't know. You need a lot of your late game big payoffs to be hit with Reality Heist for Reality Heist to be an interesting card to me. And I'm not seeing that. The times whenever I cast Reverse Engineer, half of the time I just draw 3 lands. Yeah. But sometimes you draw a counterspell, and sometimes you just need to have a counterspell to win the game. Reality Heist essentially only ever finds threats. And if you're playing a role with the artifact deck, where threats is what you want, then cool. But there are a lot of times where you need stuff that aren't threats. And if that role is a role that the artifact deck has to play, then Reverse Engineer, I think, is better. If you have 5 artifacts, you're likely to have a threat. Yeah, Reverse Engineer is also sorcery. Right, but the only time you care about holding up instants is when you're playing with counter spells, and Reality Heist explicitly doesn't play well with counter spells. So that's kind of an odd catch-22, isn't it? Because if you're playing with counter spells, you probably want to be able to draw into them. There's a vehicle that doesn't need to be to hurt / kill a creature. Yeah, that might make Reality Heist better if you can actually have a proactive artifact you can grab with it. Or I guess if you have like glass caskets and stuff to hit with Reality Heist. I don't know how good Glass Casket or Portable Hole is in the context of Historic as something that the Affinity deck wants to be digging for. I don't know. I'm not super sold on Reality Heist, but I guess the deck could get to the point where it just is an aggro deck, or you could get to a vehicle deck that just is an aggro deck, and then Reality Heist maybe gets there. Maybe it gets there. I mean, I will say it's pretty cool that Reality Heist finds Hot Shot Mechanic if we're playing white-blue Plow. Hey, and if we really want to go deep, it finds Mirror Shell Crab so that we can have our 3 mana leaks. Do we go that deep in our plow deck in Standard? Replication Specialist. 4 and a blue for a 3/4 creature Moonfolk Artificer with flying. Whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 and a blue. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. Well, it seems fun and limited, but it's much too expensive for constructed. Cyber Trespassers. 4 and a blue for a 3/5 artifact creature Moonfolk Rogue. Channel. 3 and a blue, discard Cyber Trespassers. Tap up to 2 target creatures you don't control. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. Cool. Limited. Short Circuit. 1 and a blue, enchantment aura, flash, enchant artifact or creature. As long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it gets -3/-0 and loses flying. And we've seen that card before. It has historically not been good. Sky Swimmer Koi, 3 and a blue, creature fish, 3/3, flying. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Whatever. Spell Pierce, single blue, instant. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Historically, a card that has been playable at some points. Yay. I personally hate Spell Pierce because it only ever gets played in decks that are mean to me, but this is historically a deck that has seen play and is fine. Suit Up. 2 and a blue. Instant. Until end of turn, target creature or vehicle becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/5. Draw a card. Alright. So we can turn our plow into a 4/5 and attack with it for 3 mana and draw a card. That seems worse than just playing creatures that can crew plow. So, probably not. Tameshi, Reality Architect. 2 and a blue for a 2/3 legendary creature Moonfolk Wizard. Whenever 1 or more non-creature permanents are returned to hand, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So I guess that's supposed to be like ninjutsu and bounce effect synergy. X and a white, return a land you control to its owner's hand, which I guess, non-creature permanents even. Hold on, I misread that first ability. Whenever 1 or more non-creature permanents are returned to hand, draw a card, so it doesn't synergize with ninjutsu. That's really weird. That's... That's hard to build around. Okay. X and a white, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Return target artifact or enchantment card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. Okay. That doesn't strike me as good. It reanimates artifacts or enchantments, except you have to set yourself back a land drop to do so, and you have to spend a lot of mana to do so. So if you want to get a 5-drop, you have to spend 6 mana and bounce a land. And you can only do it as sorcery. You do draw a card when you return that land, I guess? This seems not stellar. Better Auriok Salvagers. Is it? Not really, right? Because you have to return a land. And Auriok Salvagers is 1 and a white, return target artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So, like, with Auriok Salvagers, you just get infinity mana with Black Lotus. Tameshi, you're limited on how many times you can return lands to your hand. So as far as that combo deck goes, Auriok Salvagers is a lot stronger. Chris, what's the best color for limited? Green. It's always green. I don't think there's ever been a set where it wasn't green. In some sets, red comes close. Tamio's Completion. 3 and a blue, enchantment aura, flash. Enchant artifact, creature, or planeswalker. When Tamio's Completion enters the battlefield, is completion actually pronounced completion, or is it like completion? And I don't know. Anyway, when Temio's completion enters the battlefield, tap enchanted permanent. If it's an equipment, unattach it. Enchanted permanent loses all abilities and doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. Huh. This is actually one of the stronger versions of this effect at 4 mana we've ever seen, and considering it's a common, it's a little deceptive. This is kind of closer to actually just 4 mana instant speed removal spell than blue usually gets. It doesn't have cycling, so it's not exactly whatever that white card was from Amonkhet that was 4 mana Flash O-Ring. But it's closer than you would expect, I guess? Cast Out, yeah. I mean, Cast Out wasn't actually a good card, so probably a comparison to Cast Out isn't exactly favorable, but yeah, usually these kind of effects don't actually remove all the abilities of the card that they're tapping, which makes this so much functionally closer to an actual removal spell than you would expect. But yeah, probably not good enough to actually see play. Tesoret, Betrayer of Flesh. Oh wait, hold on. We gotta retrieve Socks button. Socks, are you still over there? Or did you leave earlier? Yeah, I think Socks actually got let out like not too many minutes ago. We've already gone and grabbed him like twice this stream, so I think we'll let him chill. The comparison should be to Capture Sphere. Well, I'm comparing Temio's completion to a card that actually saw play, even though it was really weak and shouldn't have seen play. And it's a little worse than that card that was probably not supposed to see play. Capture Sphere is a card that definitely didn't see play. Tesoret, Betrayer of Flesh. 2 blue, legendary planeswalker Tesoret. The first activated ability of an artifact you activate each turn costs 2 less to activate. I did think about this. It specifies artifact and not artifact card, which means it has the implication when they use that wording is that it means, from a rules text standpoint, artifact permanent. So this does not make channel abilities of artifacts cost less. So it doesn't make Moonsnare prototype cost 3. I thought it did at first, and I was excited about that, but that's not how it works. What's synchronous summoning? Don't ask that. You're only going to hurt yourself. It will make me cry, because it did. Alright, +1. Draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, unless you discard an artifact card. -2. Target artifact becomes an artifact creature. If it isn't a vehicle, it has base power and toughness 4/4. -6. You get an emblem with whenever an artifact you control becomes tapped, draw a card. No until end of turn on the -2. Oh, alright, that's actually important to note. It's... I mean, 4 mana isn't a huge amount. Making something into a 4/4 immediately that can theoretically attack with haste is a lot of stats. And then they do gotta answer the Planeswalker. It threatens to make another thing into a 4/4 again the next turn. It could even upgrade some of your artifact creatures into 4/4s if that's all you've got. Permanently cruise a vehicle, although if the vehicle is smaller than a 4/4, the fact that it doesn't turn it into a 4/4 is kind of a bummer. Like, Permaplow, yeah. Could be another card for our blue-white plow list. I don't know if it's good enough to play in the blue-white plow list. Imagine if the +1 made an artifact to fuel the -2. Yeah. We could wish, huh? We could so wish. It is also worth noting that the ability decreases the cost of crewing, so it makes our plow only cost 4 to crew. So we could -2 on something that isn't the plow, and then crew the plow with that creature. And then in Ultimate, it probably doesn't matter. I don't know how good the +1 is, but I guess maybe it's fine? Is the 2 a mana symbol? It's a generic mana symbol, yeah. Faithless Looting? Yeah, but that's with the implication that Faithless Looting is a good card. I don't know that Faithless Looting is actually a good card if it costs 4 mana instead of 1 mana. The next card's Thirst for Knowledge. Yeah. But was that supposed to be like synergizing with Tesoret somehow? Or just that the first ability is Thirst for Knowledge? I suppose I'm getting kind of split into different directions here. It's not exactly. Alright, Thirst is draw 3, then discard 2 unless you discard an artifact. Tesoret's uptick is like tiny Thirst for Knowledge. Anyway, Thirst for Knowledge. 2 and a blue, instant. Draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card. Can be strong. If you play a deck with a lot of artifacts. I feel like that's probably a stronger card in artifact decks than Reality Heist, unless you really are getting to the point where Reality Heist costs 2 mana. But like for 3 mana, I would probably rather play Thirst for Knowledge than a Reality Heist. But also, I'm the kind of degenerate who just wants to make a land drop every single turn of the game. And card draw that doesn't help me make land drops is sad. So maybe that's just my personal kind of bias, huh? Yeah, we can discard Treasure Vault, I guess, but why would we discard a land? Thirst was a vintage card for a bit. Yeah, maybe. That doesn't seem like a good idea. Reality Heist can hit artifact lands. We only got 4 of those to hit, but it can. I mean, Thirst for Knowledge is not a bad card if it's a 3 mana draw 2 at instant speed. But that comes with a lot of deck building restrictions, and like most things that have deck building restrictions, it's tricky to rate them immediately because their playability is entirely based on whether the shell around them can support them or not. But maybe. Maybe. Finally, Thousand-Faced Shadow. Single blue for a 1/1 creature human ninja with ninjutsu 2 blue flying. When Thousand-Faced Shadow enters the battlefield from your hand, if it's attacking, create a token that's a copy of another target attacking creature. That token enters the battlefield tapped and attacking. Okay, so you can play this as a 1 mana 1/1 flyer, human ninja, to trigger other stuff's ninjutsu abilities off of if it's in your opening hand. But if you ninjutsu it into play later in the game, it makes a token of something else that's attacking. It's an enabler and a payoff, which is cool. That's a lot of utility filled with one deck building slot, and kind of loops with itself. If you just keep bouncing other Thousand-Faced Shadows, you get a loop going where you just make a bunch of attackers that presumably have hopefully good ETB effects. Whatever you make a copy of doesn't even have to be an unblocked creature. So if you're like bouncing Thousand-Faced Shadows to replay other Thousand-Faced Shadows, and you keep making more copies of like some random Manowar, that could be interesting. So far, I would say the biggest problem with that is there's not a ton of other good ninjutsu payoffs, I guess. Unfortunately, it targets. In what sense is that unfortunate? I guess that they can blow out the ability by removing whatever you target in response to the target. Which, yeah, that's sad. This is true. Like it targets a thing it clones? Yeah. But I think it has to work that way. I guess it could enter the battlefield and just make a clone token, but that would be confusing. wording. I only count 5 faces, not 1,000. Well, presumably the faces are digital and can change on the fly. So maybe you get up to 1,000 if you're not in frozen time. It's unfortunate that it can only target other attacking creatures. Yeah, but even if you have to make a chump attack with something that's just going to get killed, that's not horrible, because you're going to get a copy of it that is unblocked and attacking. So that one, the copy won't die. Yeah. Well, Skyclave and other O-ring style creatures, that's true. Less fun to copy those and have your opponent immediately get a token back. Although I guess they'd have to double block the Skyclave, because if you copy the Skyclave, you can just remove whatever they blocked with. Sometimes. You could do it with Skyclave before blockers are declared to remove blockers. No, you can't. You have to ninjutsu after blockers are declared. A creature isn't considered unblocked until after the declared blockers step. Which is not really intuitively explained in the reminder text, but is the way the mechanic is worded. Yeah, I think this is interesting. But it's mostly a question of what kind of powerful ETB creatures can you recycle with it if this is going to be an engine. And honestly, 4 mana is a lot, so you have to hope your opponent isn't playing instant speed removal too. Alright. Well, that's it for blue.